Hello, everyone. It is Saturday night at 10 o'clock, and this is Starfleet Tactical. I am, of course, Chris Weave. I'm not quite entirely solo tonight. Lissa's going to be joining us. In fact, I see Lissa approaching. She's sitting at her computer, so her timing is perfect. She's putting her headphones on. She's got her headphones on, and I'm going to bring her in. All right.
Hello.
Lissa, how are you?
I'm good. What about yourself?
I'm doing pretty good. So I was telling Lissa earlier that Pat is not going to be here tonight. Pat's actually traveling. He's actually in Atlanta right now.
Oh, is he?
Yeah,
he's in my neck of the woods.
Yeah, so he's there doing Navy stuff because that's where his reserve unit is. But between just having to get up at dark 30 to go down there yesterday after working a long day the day before, and then having to get up at dark 30 today to go off and do Navy stuff. And then when he called me, he said something to the effect of, "Oh yeah, this isn't Central Time Zone here." And so he finally decided that discretion is the better part of valor since he has to actually work tomorrow. So he decided that he was going to not be here, and he's actually not going to be here next week either. But I am, because my business trip got canceled.
Well, I'll be here next week, but the week after I won't.
Okay. Well, I should be here. I'm expecting actually to be here until. Actually, I'm gonna talk about that in a second. I actually have a little schedule slide that I'm going to put up. So let's see. We've got. Let me find this real quick. To switch over here. Why is this not scrolling the right way? I'm not seeing.
I do not know.
Okay, I'm not seeing everything here in StreamYard, and I don't know why. So Stephen Ross says Pat's in Atlantis doing Navy stuff. Atlanta.
No, it's the lost city of Atlanta.
The lost city of Atlanta.
You've seen that Futurama episode, right?
No, I haven't. I need to.
Gosh.
So
go back and watch the older episodes of Futurama.
Yeah, I like Futurama. So, we got a quick question here. I'll go ahead and answer it. What is the progress of Axanar? Last I heard, they were Alec was getting together to do they were getting ready to go to California to do the shoots, right?
Yep. That is the plan. I don't know the exact dates, but they are getting ready to do that. I know last I heard that they had been talking about casting and stuff like that behind the scenes. And obviously the situation with Crystal's mom has kind of also put a little bit of a wrench in everything. So for those who don't know, we have talked about this on Two Gay Girls just in passing, but Crystal's mom is very sick right now. And I'm not going to go into details, but just, keep Crystal and her mom and, Alec and all of them in your thoughts. If you do the prayer thing, do that. But it's not looking good, is all I will say.
I'm very sorry to hear that, but I mean, I've got to do plenty of that this last year. So,
yeah. So yes, the plan is to be out in California as soon as possible, to finish up some of the reshoots. I don't have an exact timeline as to when that is happening, because also some of that is a little bit fluid.
All you need to do is figure out when COVID's going to be over.
About that. It's not going to be over ever. At this point, it's in the endemic phase, and we're just trying to figure out how we navigate things going forward now.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. So, but that's been the big monkey wrench as of late. So, but yeah, it's Logic's Finest shared a similar experience here, and this. I just had the 1-year anniversary of my mom's death a couple of weeks ago. And so my friend Arias died. It'll be a year towards the end of June. So, yeah.
It doesn't feel like it's been that long, though.
Yeah, it does.
Somehow.
But I've made the comment. I can't remember if I've said it on the show, but I was talking with Pat earlier today about it. I've made the comment that The second best major event that happened to me in 2021 was I got electrocuted. So the best major event was I ran an online conference that came off without a hitch. It was perfect. Everything worked well. It was great. It just was fantastic. The second best major event was I got electrocuted. Now, it was on purpose, and my heart was back. It was. I mean,
I know. I'm aware of your cardiac issues. It's just when you say it like that, it's like you can't help but just like take a moment to go, "Oh my god, hi, Kara." Excuse me while I
and it would have been I've been telling people that I would have had it done. I was sedated for it, and I thought seriously about just saying, like, do you have to sedate me? Because while it would be an unpleasant experience, it's a really short experience and it would be unique. So I thought, okay, let's, do that. And then they explained the part where they were going to shove the ultrasound down my throat so they can take a picture apart from the back to make sure that I don't have any clots forming in my atria. And at that point I said, yeah, why don't you go ahead and knock me out? That'd be great.
To answer your question, yes, it will be published on YouTube when completed.
Yes. So
just like the original, it will also be published on the Axanar YouTube channel.
Now, I should note for the record that my official, other than doing Starfleet Tactical and occasionally showing up on Alec's various shows, like occasionally I'll catch him and I'll post something and he'll throw me up on line with him. Other than that, I don't speak for Alec. Just like my employer does not speak for me and I don't speak for my employer. So I'm surprised that nobody bothered to remind me of that. But so, Alec is the person Alec knows what the schedule is. Alec doesn't call me up and tell me, hey, Chris, this is what the schedule is in case somebody asks. I have the same sources of information. Lissa has a few because she's actually involved with the production. I'm not involved with the production at all. I just happened to, I saw the set once and it was cool and got sort of sucked in surprisingly into doing a weekly show. So.
I mean, I'm about the same. Like, I've been on the set. I've helped with it a little bit, but like for the most part, I get snippets here and there from Crystal and Alec. I mostly just do the live streams.
Yeah. So,
and I occasionally pet sit for them when I have the ability to.
So that's good. So let's see. What else has been going on? Oh, I can't remember. Part of the problem, of course, is I can never remember what I say online because there are times where I will listen to the show and then I'll listen to another one and I realize that I had like the exact same conversation 2 weeks in a row because I can't remember what I've said online when I haven't. I can't remember if I told people that I got probably not actually because I haven't been here for a couple of weeks. I got diagnosed with anemia.
Okay. I know you were talking about getting the test done for that last we talked.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So it came back. I'm positive I had anemia, which is good actually because that's
now was it anemia in that like it was iron deficiency or was
iron
it
deficiency?
Okay, because there's a couple different types of anemia.
Yeah, it was iron deficiency, and so I'm taking iron supplements again now. So I'm a bariatric patient, right? So you mono stomachs can process iron a lot better and process all medications and everything better than us bi stomachs can. I mean, I literally have two stomachs. I used to have one, and doctors went in and cut things apart and assembled two stomachs, and I've got one that processes food and one that doesn't. So we. Like I can't take time release meds. It doesn't do any good. It passes through my system before it has a chance to release. And so like when I periodically get blood work done, and when they do the blood work, when the bariatric blood work's done, they take 5 vials because normally you only have that much blood taken if they think you have a problem. If you're a bariatric patient, they assume you have a problem or that you're going to, and they want to catch it early. So there was one other time when I was heading towards anemia and they threw some iron supplements at it and they headed it off at the pass. And then I started boosting the normal supplements I was taking and thought I had that problem licked, but I was also having some stomach issues recently. The solution for, if you look at the ingredient list on almost any antacid, it says what? Calcium carbonate, right?
Yep.
Your stomach can process either iron or calcium, but it can't do both at the same time, and it prefers to do calcium.
Yes.
And so I'm taking great handfuls of calcium carbonate, and I'm not processing iron. So I think I pretty much did it to myself. But the good news in all of this is that I now feel actually really, really good. I was at the point where I was like, I just hit the wall.
I love that, right? Yes. Yeah.
You know what?
We'll get back to you on that.
I have been assured that actually that's how that stomach works. All you need to do is get me some spice melange. So, right, I'm gonna task you to get the spice melange so that I can fold space.
Exactly. Also, in regards to this real quick, it is my understanding that Alec is still doing things with Avalon Universe. We are not necessarily the people to be asking these questions to, because we kind of get sporadic information. Like, yes, we do get a little bit more information behind the scenes than you guys, but most of this stuff is not stuff that gets passed along to us.
Was Avalon filming on the Axanar sets?
I think they did some on the Axanar sets.
Okay. Because, of course, right now the bridge isn't in pieces anymore, but, you take the bridge apart, you ship it to where you're going to reassemble it, and then you reassemble it. And when I asked him, Alec, about it, maybe 2 weeks ago, he said that it would take a couple of months because basically, once or twice a month, they all get together and because a lot of this stuff involves lifting. You need multiple people to do it, right? It's not a one person job. And everybody's a volunteer in this project. And so it was going to take them a while to get it redone. So you have to get everything in place and rewired, and all the computer equipment has to go in, because when I first saw the set, well, I say first saw the set, the only time I saw the set, it still had lots of plexiglass overlays sort of stuff, right? But it's my understanding that since then Dana has replaced that all with touch screens, and so it looks pretty good. Which means, they can, that's a brilliant move to set things up for the future where you can actually.
There's a handful of like television sets now, and they're all run on, it's like, I want to say it's 4 or 5 Raspberry Pis.
Okay. So,
really quick, really easy setup, comparatively speaking, to what it could be for some of that stuff.
Yeah.
Because Raspberry Pis are very simple.
So we got a good question here. Right,
Logic's
said that he's
Finest?
on it, although the sources are limited.
That's right.
This is something that's actually they really were that close in World War II, and that's because you needed to get that close in order to do air defense stuff. Now, ships getting close together is really pretty dangerous because it's not like driving your car.
Wakes. The wakes that are formed between boats can be very dangerous.
There's hydrodynamic effects where they try to pull them together. There's delays in the controls responding to your inputs. Like if you're in a steamship and you're trying to increase speed, that takes a while. You don't really have brakes. You turn slowly. There's all sorts of issues there. But you want to have everybody close together because you're having to do air defense stuff. Then when nuclear weapons came onto the scene, then they started spreading out. And so you ended up with these widely dispersed formations. Luckily, about the same time you got nuclear weapons, you also got proximity shells. In fact, proximity shells were a much bigger deal than nuclear weapons were in World War II.
They still are.
Yeah, they still are. I mean,
nuclear weapons are a last resort thing because it's one of those situations of mutually assured destruction if you use it. Because as soon as you bring one out, the other person's going to bring one out, and then it's just a shit show.
Yeah, the U.S. Navy assumption for a long time was that when the war went up, they'd lose the fleet at sea.
Yeah.
That's why you ended up with things. Admiral Zumwalt, when he was chief of naval operations, he was the guy behind the Perry class frigate. And the idea was that you were going to have this high-low mix. You were going to have the high mix that was the high-end ships that were going to basically be garrison forces, and they would surge out once the war happened. And then you'd have the low-end ships that were sort of around most of the time doing day-to-day stuff. And the assumption was you were just going to lose them. So that plan didn't last, but that's what the plan was at one point. So Rob says, so yeah, there is some interesting stuff in there, and I need to actually go back and reread that. I've thought about inviting John to come on the show, but the thing is, John is a wonderful guy. I have lunch with him whenever I go visit Chris Carlson. So Chris Carlson, Pat Doyle, and John Parshall and I will get together and do lunch whenever I go up to Minneapolis. And so that's always fantastic. John's only got two character flaws. He's not a gamer and he's not a science fiction guy. So if you want to talk Navy with him, he'll talk Navy all day long. But when it gets to science fiction, when it gets to gaming stuff, he's just sort of like, yeah, it's not his thing. So that's why why I haven't invited him on, why he hasn't been part of it when I've been at Chris Carlson's and we've been on the air. So
ironically, I'm not really a Navy person either, but I know just enough to talk my way through some bullshit. Well,
hopefully you're getting better at that.
I am also, since being my grandfather's caretaker. I mean, he's former Navy. He's retired Navy. So,
oh well. All right, I'm going to go ahead and throw the slides up so we can schedule just a little bit to start off with. Okay, so I'm perennially behind in the comments. So here's my somewhat Chris-centric schedule, because Pat, I can schedule out farther than Pat can as a general rule. That short term, I was supposed to be at Nellis Air Force Base right now. And I was going to be there for like 2.5 weeks or something like that. But that got canceled. So I'm going to be around. I've got some traveling to do, but it's like back to Iowa and stuff like that. So I should be available to do the show. I'm feeling much better. I already talked about that. But I think the chances that for medical reasons, I'm just going to have to cancel. Delon. I didn't realize that your flight was at 4 a.m. So, well, have a safe flight, Delon. I'll talk to you later. So the next, there's going to be a show at the end of the month that's going to actually probably be from Delon's desk, because I'm going to be in Des Moines over Memorial Day. I think I'm going to be available basically through the beginning of July, with the exception of the 11th of June. I'm probably going to be at the Origins Game Fair on that Saturday. I'm doing 2 presentations. I'm doing the Starship Troopers presentation, which you guys have seen, and the What the U.S. Navy Taught Me About Starfleet presentation, which I think I'm 95% sure that I've also done on this show. So that I'm going to go do that. Pat is no for next week. And I think after that, we're not quite sure what his schedule looks like. But he's a hard no for next week because he's off doing the airline pilot thing as he does. I haven't yet started doing Exordium, but like I said, I'm going to do Exordium. I'm going to talk about the combat model in there. So this is either an opportunity for you to read and sort of know what it's going to be like, or have the background when I do it, or it's an opportunity for you to listen to me talk about it. Perhaps even giving some spoilers in the process, unavoidable ones, because I'm going to talk about the combat model, so I have to talk about examples of combat. But it'll be an opportunity for you to sort of see it in advance and decide whether you want to do it or not. And I also need to start watching Babylon 5, because sometime in June we're going to talk about Babylon 5. So first half of Babylon 5, first half of season 1 is the place to start. I also want. Pat doesn't know this yet, but the next time Pat and I are on together, we're going to talk about the pilot episode of Strange New Worlds, because the pilot episode of Strange New World is available on YouTube for free. So the first episode is up there, so I suggest everybody should go ahead and look at it. Let's see. So Rob is quoting the Kindle edition of Shattered Sword. It's a very good book. It's worth taking a look at. So let's see. Next slide is okay. So I told you that I wanted to do this naval combat series because there's a handful of things that I find myself rereading on a regular basis because they've got some interesting things in them. And so last show, I did a little bit of a prelude to this. And now I'm going to talk about an article by a man named Harris Lanning, and I'll talk about him in just a second, a little bit more about him. So this is basically what I intend to go through on this. These are all things that I think are worth looking at because they're good examples about how to think about the problem. That's really one of the things that I'm actually quite proud of about this show. There's lots of people on the internet that will talk to you about, there's this Star Trek ship and it's got here's the capabilities of it, et cetera, et cetera. But my goal isn't to just talk to you about Star Trek ships. My goal is to that in the end that you've got a better tools for thinking about these things, right? So I think that these are all things that are worth reading because they help you understand how the real world works, and they give you the tools to then turn and look at science fiction and understand how it works. I always tell people that my fandom superpowers, I can talk about real world navies and science fiction navies at the same time. And I also say, my hobby, in my day job, I'm a naval analyst, and for fun, I analyze navies that don't actually exist. And so that's kind of my goal, is to help bring everybody along in those regards. So okay, so I actually said most of this in the last slide, but this is what I'm tending to go through. These are all excellent illustrations about how to think about naval combat. And a lot of science fiction is based on a naval model of some sort. There's a couple of different naval models, but it's based on naval models, but a lot of times they're done kind of poorly. And so my goal isn't to make anybody not like something that they previously liked. But I do believe that, first of all, disbelief should be suspended and not lynched. And second of all, that it's useful to be able to look at these things and sort of analyze them and sort of figure out whether they work or not. I find that I get more enjoyment by being able to turn it into an intellectual exercise rather than just to sort of sit back and, drink it in. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about Harris Lanning's The Naval Battle. So Harris Lanning was a graduate of the United States Naval Academy. He was assigned to the Naval War College as a student in 1921. And then he stayed at the Naval War College and was assigned as the head of the Department of Tactics. And that's not unusual for how this works. The Naval War College used to do that all the time, where they'd send somebody through the program and then they'd stick around and actually be on the staff, and they'd sort of pick whoever seemed to be doing the best to be the head of the department. Lanning was an experienced officer at this point. He graduated from the U.S. Naval Academy in 1895. So he already had 24 years of experience when he went to the War College. So he was an experienced officer. He knew his stuff. He came back about 9 years later as the president of the Naval War College. And he discovered, to his surprise, that the paper that he had written as his thesis when he was at as a student, that they were using it as a required reading. And so he said, I can do better than that. And he rewrote it. And so this was something that was actually part of the curriculum. In fact, if you look up a copy of his book, his autobiography, An Admiral's Yarn, it's printed as an appendix in it. And it's available online. You can find it online. And it's still got the markings that it was originally a confidential document. In fact, I really wish that the Naval War College had crossed that line out, because it always bothers me when people don't cross that line out when they print stuff. But this captures his thinking about naval warfare in the late 1920s, early 1930s. So, and then, back then we're really talking about surface warfare, right? Yeah, there's submarines, and the submarines are potentially important, and airplanes had a tremendous lot of potential, but it was at that point that potential had not been realized, and they were mostly there for scouting. He understood that they were going to be something where they could drop bombs and stuff, but it's all throughout this paper, he's sort of saying like, yeah, we don't quite know how airplanes work in this yet, but here's what our thinking is. So he was also the uncle of Caleb Barrett Lanning, who some of you might recall was a classmate of Robert Heinlein. And he's did some of the early work on the Combat Information Center. He basically was the guy who came up with the idea. And while they didn't say this he didn't say this when he was pitching it to his bosses, Caleb Lanning was very much thinking about Doc Smith and the Directrix, the fleet command ship from that series. That's what he was thinking of when they proposed the Combat Information Center. And so there's some other interesting stories in there about him and his relationship with Heinlein back in the day. So, but tonight we're talking about the uncle. Okay, so this is a slide that I included that I spent a lot of time talking about last time. I just wanted to throw it up again and remind you of a few things. There's some very interesting differences between what the early 20th century U.S. Navy looked like in Starfleet in terms, a lot of it has to do with the range of weapons versus the speed of the ship, right? The relative proportion about that. Back in surface Navy times, you're shooting like 20 nautical miles and you're moving at, if you're an Iowa class BB and you're moving at 30 knots, it's going to take you like 40 minutes to get to where that shell landed. You don't see shots like that in Star Trek. I mean, everything in Star Trek happens relatively close together. And so it's interesting looking at those differences, right? And if you keep that in the back of your head as we're going through the rest of this, because that's really sort of a fundamental element that will constantly show up in Lanning's work. There's this real heavy element on how slow things are to develop and how you have to think it through, because you can't just, make it up on the fly. You have to have a plan. You have to think it through. You have to know when to react. And it's going to take you some period of time to actually implement things. In fact, I don't include it in one of the slides, but at some point he says something to the effect of, you want the battle line moving as slow as possible, not as fast as possible, but as slow as possible as it's moving to engage, because all the ships that are sort of in formation with it and they're moving around doing stuff and they're trying to get into the position they're going to be in for when the fleet actually engages, they need to be able to get to their positions before you actually engage and start the combat. And they're potentially doing a stern chase, and it's potentially problematic for them to do so. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. So first of all, he talks about tactical dispositions and operations in the battle. And he says that the operations of a fleet in a battle have 4 distinct phases. There's the advance toward and development of the enemy force. So think of this as the cruising and scouting part, right? So the enemy's out there, you're trying to figure out exactly where he is, and you're cruising around in formation. That's your cruising formation, not your battle line formation. Your battle line formation is very dependent upon the exact axis of attack, right? Your battle line is oriented with regard to the opponent. So you can't do that orientation until you know exactly where that opponent is. So basically what you have is a cruising formation that's designed so that you can get into a battle formation when you need to. Trent Hone talks a lot about this in his work on the evolution of naval tactics in the interwar period, which I'm going to talk about in one of the future episodes, because there's some very interesting things in there. And if you've read Hone and you go back and you read Lanning, there's a few places, and I'll highlight it. I'll highlight the one here where you go, Lanning's lying. He's lying about stuff because he's trying to keep it secret. Or it may actually be that they hadn't quite developed it then, but I actually think that there's places where he's actually he is referring to the conventional wisdom, even though he knows that the U.S. plan is to throw out the conventional wisdom. So we'll talk about that a little bit. The second phase is concentration of battle groups and their deployment to engage. So you've got your fleet sort of spread out. There's parts of it that are out doing tactical scouting. You're sort of spread out in this formation. And then at some point, it's like, oh, okay, we know where the enemy is. He's over there. We need to orient on the enemy, and we need to concentrate everything together in what is going to be our battle formation. So you concentrate the battle group, and you get them in their appropriate portions, so that appropriate locations, so that they can engage with, a certain number of ships. These ships are over here, and these ships are back here supporting, et cetera, and you get everything lined up, and then you do the engagement, and so you've got your gun battle, and then there's the follow-up. The follow-up is, at some point somebody tries to break off. Maybe you let them go. Maybe you try to hunt them down and kill them. And so there's always that follow-up portion, which could be very easy. It's like, yeah, we're out of here. We both sides decide to break off, or there could be a stern chase or something like that. So he points out that there's not really a whole lot of variation in sea tactics, and that's because the forces are known. Capabilities are generally understood, right? You know what they built, because battleships are big ticket items, right? You can't just go and recruit another battleship, right? These are big capital intensive items that take some years to build. So you've got a pretty good idea of what the maximum force they can bring. You might be wrong here and there about, you didn't hear that this particular ship was having mechanical problems, or you thought a ship was having mechanical problems, but it managed to get to sea. We snuck an extra aircraft carrier into the Battle of Midway in World War II that the Japanese thought they had knocked out. But in general, you've got a pretty good idea of what, at least within the realm of the possible, what you might be facing. There's also, there's few what he calls peculiarities of terrain. And what that basically means is that the terrain is, there isn't any, right? The ocean's pretty flat. You occasionally have like shoal water that you have to worry about. You might have islands that get in the way, or that you're trying to avoid, so there's certain courses that you might want to do. But in terms of like just generally the terrains, there aren't hills, there aren't valleys, there aren't forests to hide in, anything like that. And so detection of forces is relatively easy. Right? You've got the curve of the horizon when you have that on land too. But other than that, you can pretty much see the things at a distance. And because these ships, frequently there's some sort of smoke, especially in the old days when they were doing coal. But even with oil ships, you've got smoke coming out. So you can see the smoke before you can actually see the ship. So it's actually detecting the being detected and detecting is actually relatively easy compared to ashore. So he then talks about the different weapons that you can use at sea, and he lists 4: guns, torpedoes, bombs, and mines. And he talks about how if you have to kind of cover it all there, because there's not any one weapon that's capable of defeating an enemy that's equipped with all of them. But that having been said, guns are the most effective. They're most effective in terms of range, accuracy, rate of fire, hitting power, ammo supply. You've got a lot more shells than you do torpedoes, for instance, right? But so you're really kind of trying to optimize on the gun line. Right, that's where the battle's going to be decided, is by doing the gun line. And so the other weapons are used to either take advantage of situations that are created by the gun line, or to force the other guy to sub-optimize his gun line. Right, I will threaten him with my torpedo craft and make him break his formation or bend his line away in such a way that he can't bear all of his guns. And so you're centered on the idea that you're trying to make the gun engagement work but you're using the other weapons in support of that gun engagement. So that's generally the way to think about this. That's what his argument is at this particular time. This time being May 1933. So you may recall way, way, way back when I showed you Winchell Chung's triangle. Now this, I need to go back and create a version of this that actually only deals with historical ships. This is basically the science fiction version of it, but he's got a bunch of ships listed there that are basically, the same as like World War II ships, like light cruisers, et cetera, et cetera. And it's the trade-off between propulsion, weapons, and defenses, right? You've only got so much mass on the ship, and you're dedicating mass to these different functions. And so there's a trade-off. And Lanning makes the argument that ships generally have one thing as their primary weapon, although you'll see that it's rarely so cut and dried as that. There's a lot of exceptions that prove that particular rule. And you've got the particular weapon that the ship is trying to use, and everything else in that ship is designed to make that weapon effective. So, for instance, if you want to have big guns, you have to have a big ship, because it's got to be a stable firing platform. It's got to be able to support these big, heavy guns. You have to have a big ship. If you're going to put like 16-inch guns on it, you need a big ship. You can't put those on little ship. You want to have salvo firing. You want to take advantage of the fact that you can have fire control and all these other things that go along with it. And so as a result of that, you want that stuff all together in a big ship, and you're willing to trade off on things like speed, et cetera, in order to get that big ship. Now, over time, people came up with weapons that potentially could threaten the ship, right? So the torpedo was viewed as a one-shot, one-kill weapon. Most gun shells weren't one-shot, one-kill, unless you got a really lucky hit. But torpedoes were considered to be one-shot, one-kill because, first of all, they carried a huge amount of explosive. Second of all, because it was under the water line, that both made the explosive more effective, because the explosion, it's easier to push air out of the way than it is to push water out of the way. So it's like there's a great big mass of water that focuses the explosion towards the ship, and it makes that explosion more powerful. Plus, it's underneath the water line, so it's likely to make the ship flood if it's damaged. So torpedoes were one-shot, one-kill weapons. Well, so torpedoes made battleships obsolete, right? Well, no, because you developed tactics to counter that, and you developed other ship types to counter that, right? So you had torpedo boats, and then you had torpedo boat destroyers whose job it was to hunt down the torpedo boats. So it's important, though, to understand that doesn't mean that like a battleship couldn't deal with a torpedo boat. Remember, the battleship is trying to optimize its gunfire, right? Because the gunfire is how you're going to win the battle, and you're using your light forces to force him to suboptimize, and you're using your light forces to protect your battleships. Not because they can't deal with it, but because in order to deal with it, they have to maneuver, they have to suboptimize their gun firing solution in order to make that happen. In fact, Admiral Jellicoe, I need to track this down again, but Admiral Jellicoe says almost those exact words. He says, yeah, we can deal with that stuff. We just don't want to. It's more cost effective for us to have other ships to take care of that. Because, for the price of one battleship, you can buy a lot of destroyers. And those destroyers can make sure that the battleship isn't being harassed. Okay. So here's a little chart that I put together. The part in red there, anything that you see in red is a direct quote from Lanning's article. So this is the part, I sort of translated this and another part of the article into sort of a summary slide here, a summary chart of this. And you can see that, if all of these things sort of balance out, right? You've got heavy armor to go with the many heavy guns of a battleship. Battleships end up being big as a result of this. You've got cruisers have high speed because they're sort of doing harassing type stuff. They're using their guns against the enemy light ships that are trying to use torpedoes against our stuff, but they can also fire torpedoes against capital ships if they end up in that. This is basically just a little summary of how this all works out, with aircraft carriers and submarines kind of being a little bit weird there. Aircraft carriers in particular, he says, are similar to battle cruisers or light cruisers in terms of most of their capabilities, except instead of having guns, they have airplanes, which, makes sense. So when you put all these together, talk a little bit about this separately, but when they're coordinated together, they act in support of each other. I've already talked a bit about this stuff, is that both sides are trying to optimize their gun line. And if you start with the assumption that the opposing commander knows his stuff, he's trying to optimize his gun line and sub-optimize yours. You're trying to do the exact same thing. As a result of that, you generally end up in a situation where it's kind of suboptimal for both of you, right? You'd really like to cross the enemy's T. You'd really like a situation where all your turrets are turned to broadside, but he can only shoot his front turrets or his back turrets at you because you've crossed his T, and as a result, you have a gunfire advantage over him. But he's not going to let you do that, right? So chances are you're going to end up in parallel courses, and you're going to be firing at each other just sort of across the line. And those fights are expected to sort of develop in the way he says here. So you've got this dominating phase of the battle, the gunfight between the heavy ships. You then have attacks on the battle line by vessels carrying torpedoes to make the other ships maneuver in such a way as to sub-optimize their gun line. And against those attacks, you've got ships that are going to try to defend your battle line against those attacks so they don't have to maneuver. Right? It's not that they can't maneuver away from these guys. It's not that they can't, optimize fire against the attackers. They're busy trying to shoot the enemy battleships. They don't want to have to deal with this shit. And then on top of it, you've got like submarines that are sort of getting in the way there. And all this is about forcing the opponent to change his course, to bend his line in such a way that you can actually take advantage of that situation. Now, remember when I said that Lanning is kind of lying about something? So he talks about parallel lines here, right? And as a general rule, people talked about you'd end up sort of coming together and end up moving in parallel, right? So you're side by side moving in the same direction. And, the traditional thought was if your battle cruisers are at the front and your battle cruisers are trying to get ahead so that they can cap the enemy's line and force the enemy to turn away in such a way that now he's got a knuckle in his line and he's sub-optimized and you're able to do a better job of shooting at him, right? So the battle cruisers are trying to get in front of each other, and if the enemy's got battle cruisers, you're probably not having any luck with that, and so you just basically end up in this parallel line. Well, the U.S. Navy's battle line was really, really slow up until the advent of the fast battleships, right? Until the North Carolina class came in line, which came on board like 1939, 1940. Until then, the U.S. battle line was famously slow. And we didn't build any battle cruisers. We had started building battle cruisers. The Washington Naval Treaty came along. All those battle cruisers the Lexington and Saratoga both got turned into aircraft carriers. So the end result of that was we didn't have any battle cruisers. We were going to lose that fight. So our solution was we were going to go the other way. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. That'll be in the Trent Hone talk about how, but we had specific plans on how to do that in such a way to make the other guy think that we were doing it the way that he wanted us to do it, but we were actually going to do a head fake and do it the other way. And I think that part of what Lanning said here was specifically, at this point, he's got 2 stars, and he's reinforcing the belief of all of our potential opponents that this is how we're going to handle the situation, even though I need to go back and check Trent's work on this, but I don't think I think by this point we weren't planning on doing that. We weren't planning on doing that. Okay, so the battle cruisers, like I said, are useful in bending the opponent's battle line. They can also strike on the flanks, so they can attack them when they're busy doing something else, or they can support friendly light forces on the flanks as well. But there's a real danger here because these ships are very lightly armored. They don't have quite as many guns as the heavy ships do. They're the same caliber, but they don't have as many guns on a pound per pound basis. They're frequently bigger. Like the British battle cruisers, the British World War I battle cruisers were bigger than the battleships. Don't think of this as being a smaller ship. It's a bigger ship because they had twice as many boilers because they needed it to go as fast as they did. But there's not very many of them. And if they get too far away from the gun line, so they're unsupported, they can be defeated in detail. And so Lanning makes the argument that this is why the navies of the world really stopped building battle cruisers, that it was too tough to coordinate, that the line between them being useful and going out and doing all these things on the flanks, etc., and them overextending to the point where the other guy could sort of cut it off and kill it, it was just too dangerous. And so as a result of that, they got rid of it. Now, I would argue that there was something else going on here too. And the other thing that was going on is that they were building bigger and bigger ships. And as the ships got bigger, and the volume of a ship is basically the cube of the dimensions of the ship. So if you double it in all dimensions, the volume goes up by a factor of 8. If you think about it, what happens when you double it in all dimensions? It's 2 by 2 by 2, so it's a factor of 8. And as a result of that, they're able to put more machinery in. And as a result of that, they get to the point where they've reached the hydrodynamic limit on these ships. So if you look at the Iowa class, the Iowa class goes as fast as it can go, and it's reached the point where you can't really add much more engine power to make it go any faster. It's really going to go as fast as it's going to go. And so you get to the point where you no longer have to decide whether you're going to have your cake and eat it or eat it. You can have your cake and eat it too. And I think that that's another bit about it. The difference between a battleship and a battle cruiser over this time period, they just kept getting closer and closer together until eventually, when you get to the fast battleships, they're also battle cruisers. Those two parallel evolutionary lines come back together. So destroyers can form the anti-submarine screen. They're also the flanking force to attack enemy positions. So if the enemy is maneuvering his battle line, he may open an opportunity for the destroyers to go in and attack, or they can force him to turn by presenting a torpedo threat. And likewise, you have the light cruisers to not only do scouting out there because they're fast and they've got a lot of endurance and they can go out and do tactical scouting, but they can also support the destroyers. Okay, the next step is the advance, approach, and deployment. Now I'm not going to go into this in super huge details because he spends a lot of time talking about how many ships are in which position and this and that and the other thing. And a lot of it is really dealing with the particulars of those kind of ships at that time period, right? So I don't want to get too deep in the weeds because I'm not going to make the argument that Starfleet should do it this way. This is about understanding why we did it the way we did it, so that we've got some analytic tools that we can then turn and look at Starfleet and see, okay, how are they doing it? And so as a result of that, I don't want to get really deep in the details on that. But I will say, what I do have here is that there are certain criteria that he gives there in red for what your cruising formation should be, what your disposition for the advance of the battle fleet is how he phrases it, what it should be. So it needs to be, you need to be able to shift to offensive operations. You need to be able to quickly and accurately deploy the fleet for combat, regardless of which direction you discover the enemy in. So you need to be able to sort of basically turn for wherever you are. That generally means you don't want all the ships in a big line. The steaming formation was generally parallel lines, or at some point it was a circular formation, because that way you can then shift the axis and everybody just sort of lines up. You need to be able to reintegrate all your forces. And you need to be able to be in a situation where you can't be surprised, right? If you're surprised, you can react quickly enough to deal with the threat. It's important to remember a couple of things, though, about this. You've got, even though the detection is easy, that doesn't mean that you can see all of the enemy. You can't even see all of yourself. So wherever the admiral is, he can only see part of his fleet. Because the fleet's covering enough space that it's strung out, and you can't see everything. You can't see all of the enemy fleet. It's not unusual. The flagship's in the middle of the formation. It may be a long time before the flagship actually sees the enemy, right? So part of your ship, as part of your fleet, can see part of his fleet. You can't see everything. He can't see everything. And that's just sort of fundamentally the way it is. Now, the U.S. Navy at this point, U.S. fleet, was broken into two forces. There was the scouting force, and there was the battle force. And the scouting force was generally faster ships. It had more cruisers. It was smaller. It had more cruisers and stuff like that. But it did have some battleships. And then the battle force was sort of the main battle line. The scouting force was really to do strategic level scouting. It wasn't there to do tactical scouting. It was like to make sure, like, okay, he's in this area over here, so that's where we're going to go. It's not exactly where he is. It's not like it's sort of giving you a general idea of where to look. So part of what he talks about is you can't make the assumption as a fleet commander that the scouting force is going to be able to get back in time. Right? It's like, we've detected the enemy ship, everybody come back. The scouting force will do its best to get back there, but you're maneuvering, and you may not have the option of waiting for the scouting force to come. So you need to have a plan that works without the scouting force being there. If they show up, that's great. Since they're faster ships, they can do flanking attacks, they can do all that other stuff. But especially if they're somewhat behind you, it may be tough for them to catch you. That's one of the reasons why he talks about moving the battle line slowly, is because it lets everybody get caught up. All of this stuff takes time. And he spends a lot of time talking about the timing of this. He says, the worst thing you can do is react too late, is to move into the appropriate formation too late. But he also says the second worst thing you can do is do it too early. Because you need to be able to get everybody into position so that when they then get to the engagement point, they're all engaged. That if you rush right in early, you won't have everybody in the position they need to be in for when it's time to actually engage. And so all this stuff takes time, and you need to sort of orchestrate this. And you're doing this with limited information because you can't see everything. You can't see the enemy fleet. You're relying on reporting that's coming in. Now, I used to spend a lot of time at sea with the United States Navy, so I had an idea of this. I saw there were instances where there was stuff that I saw that was very reminiscent of problems that Jellicoe had at the Battle of Jutland with how reports were coming in and stuff. So that's not unusual. Okay, so he then talks about a few tactical principles. One is that it's all about the gun line. You need to have mutual support with the gun line. The guns can fire to protect the small ships. You don't want to get too far away from the ability of the gun line to protect you. And you're protecting the gun line also. So you need to sort of keep everybody coordinated. You need to focus on the objective. Pursuing secondary objectives is okay because you have secondary objectives because they support the primary objectives. But he says, sometimes there'll come a point where it's like, okay, it's time to stop doing the secondary objective, right? Yeah, we didn't fully accomplish the secondary objective, but it's time to shift over. and don't keep pursuing a secondary objective. Don't go and keep pursuing these guys that you're trying to kill when what you really want to do is just drive them off. You've successfully driven them off. Now it's time to come back and focus on the primary objective. The environment is very important. Having the wind at your back is good because it'll blow the smoke towards the enemy, and it's a problem they have to deal with. Having the sun at your back is not good because you get silhouetted. It's easier to be spotted if the sun is at your back. So it's important to pay attention to those things when you're doing your fleet disposition. Don't let yourself be surprised, which basically means have a formation that makes it hard to surprise you. And he says, smoke is greatly underappreciated, or words to that effect. Okay, so what do we learn from this conversation? What do I think we learned from the entire idea of doing of what Harris Lanning had to say? So combatants are usually designed to meet particular roles in the battle. And by this, I mean they're usually built around a weapon system, and the other attributes are designed to complement that weapon system, right? So you don't have light ships that are really slow as a general rule. Well, you did in World War II, because in World War II, they were all trying to deal with submarines, and they were so desperate for ships that they'd have slow ships trying to deal with submarines, but submarines are slow. So, if you need a ship that has a great deal of speed in order to be able to do a torpedo attack, those ships they traded off for speed. They were willing to make that trade-off in order to get those other attributes. You can never get everything you want. You're going to have to make a trade-off. The second thing is if there is a dominant weapon system, and there usually is, although sometimes the issue is clearer than others. In this case, the dominant weapon system was the gun. The best answer is to build your tactics around that weapon system, right? So you're optimizing for the gun line. So everything is about making your gun line more effective. And this defines the roles for all the combatants, not just the ones that have that weapon system, right? The purpose of those torpedo attack craft are to support the gun line. It's not to just make torpedo attacks, it's to support the gun line. And so you use your light forces, your escorting forces, in order to force the other guy to suboptimize, and in order to prevent the other guy from forcing you to suboptimize on your primary weapon system. Next, sensor range is extremely important, not just in absolute terms, but in terms of the range per time at speed, i.e. your reaction time, right? If and this goes back to what I said at the very beginning, that chart at the very beginning about if you are moving slowly and it takes you a while to deploy, you need to know when to deploy, and you need to be able to detect in time for you to deploy, which in turn means you need to do tactical scouting. And finally, the approach is as important as the engagement itself, because if you screw up the approach, then you will end up screwing up the engagement. So you can't just think in terms of like, this is what I want my battle formation to be. You have to think in terms of, how do I orchestrate going from one to the other? That's the key to winning. Okay. So what do we see in Star Trek? Well, we don't see this stuff. None of it. Well, really, we don't see it. Now, okay, first of all, usual caveats. Everybody on this show has probably heard me say 15 different times, you always have to ask yourself, which Star Trek? Because they're all different. They all had different writer rooms. Things evolved over time. I have a tendency to process everything in terms of Sternbach and Okuda, conversations with Pat Doyle, conversations with Andy Presby, plus some of my own headcanon. So that's sort of how I look at it, because it's not really a consistent story overall. Let's ignore the entire it's a TV show for a moment and just sort of look at what we see. So Federation ships deploy quickly and they redeploy quickly. There's none of this, it's going to take us 45 minutes to get into position. They just move like airplanes. It's really like airplanes more than it is like ships in this regard. They don't really have much time to redeploy. You don't see a whole lot of sophisticated formations in this. I don't recall anything along the lines of okay, you've got your line, and then you got 1/3 of the destroyers back here and 2/3 over here, and so that the formation maneuvers this way, and they can conduct their attack, etc. You don't really see stuff like that. I mean, I remember in Deep Space Nine, you saw lots of line abreast, and they just sort of go into, there'd be a line of ships in front, a line of ships would come in, and they just run into each other. There's lots of maneuvering once the engagement happens, and sometimes you see guys that have like wingmen, but there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of formation stuff. And in part, that's because everything's happening so fast. The ships are moving very fast, and they also have just tremendous sensor ranges. I'm not sure. You can maybe argue that phasers and disruptors are the dominant weapon, in that they seem to get used a lot more than photon torpedoes. But everybody seems to sort of have their own dominant weapon. Photon torpedoes, I think, are a bigger deal in Star Trek than torpedoes were in the real world. And those weapons are relatively short ranged in terms of like how far can they shoot versus how fast can the ship cover the similar distance. In that regard, in some ways, it kind of reminds me of the Age of Sail. Age of Sail ships were very short, very slow, but their weapons range just wasn't very good at all. So it's not exactly the same, because you also didn't have Age of Sail. Age of Sail ships were very formation focused and things like that. But it's shares some elements like that. Sensors in Star Trek have incredibly long ranges. With the exception of having to deal with cloaked ships, there doesn't really seem to be any instance where people can get surprised, unless there's, okay, you're maybe in a nebula or something. Those situations end up being kind of contrived. As a general rule, what's out there, you see it coming, you're able to target it, and it may be that your targeting is ineffective. It may be that you can't break their shields, but as a general rule, you got a pretty good idea what you're dealing with. It also seems to me that there's limited combat specialization for ships, right? You have specialization in terms of this is a combat ship and this isn't. But when you sort of get to the combat side of things, it's really about they're just more mojo or less mojo, as opposed to having different capabilities, right? This ship is bigger and it's got more phasers and more photon torpedoes, and this ship is smaller and it's got less. Now there's an asterisk there, and that asterisk is things like the Akira class and the Defiant class, that are purpose-built warships that really sort of are kind of different in that regard. But when you think about it, there's only a handful of those different classes. We don't see enough to see differentiation between them. And in reality, they're just kind of another variant of the I want more. It's just instead they did at least with the Defiant, I want less of all that science-y stuff. And so I'll just sort of distill it down into something that's only the warship portions of it, right? But there doesn't seem to be any sort of role specialization here, other than this is a combatant. So let's take a look, and this is the last slide. So I'm only going a little bit over, Lissa. What do we see in other science fiction? So what we see in other science fiction, let's take a quick look at three properties we've looked at before: Andromeda, Renegade Legion, and Honor Harrington. And they all have different types of ships. In Andromeda, they're mission differentiated. So you've got ships that are sort of like, these ships do this piece of the battle, these ships do this piece of the battle. But we don't really have enough information regarding fleet ops to really sort of see how those things work, right? We have the information that was provided on the website, of which I've got a little clip off to the right-hand side here. With that, so if you want to go back and watch the previous show, I talked about this in some detail. We have the information about what the ships are supposed to do, but we don't actually have anything on screen that shows them doing it. For Renegade Legion, the differences in the ship types is really based on size. Now, there's some indication that maybe that size might kind of translate into role differentiation, but I need to go back, and it's been a long time since I played that game, so I need to go back and take another look at that. But the thing that I find most interesting about Renegade Legion in that regard is that uses some of the particulars of the universe to add some interesting elements. Big ships are more detectable, and as a result, you use small ships for raids, and they're dealt with by the local forces. Big ships are more detectable and generally detectable early enough that you can call for reinforcements. And so it's the implications of this are that the fact that that's how the physics work in this universe forces the creation of a strategic reserve and keeps the battles between big ships, an invasion fleet is going to be detected and is going to be countered by forces in system that are right-sized to match it. Now, when push comes to shove, this is a way of making sure that all the battles in this game end up being approximately equal. So I get that, but it's an interesting way of doing that. Finally, in Honor Harrington, you have mission differentiated ship types, and there's differences between the different major powers in terms of how they approach that. Like the Havenites have I'll make sure I get this right. I think I was about to say it backwards. One of the sides always, they'll call something a destroyer based upon its role, regardless of how big it is. The other side has a tendency to sort of put stuff into size bins, a little bit more like Renegade Legion does. And so the end result is you might have a destroyer fighting another destroyer, and one is twice as big as the other, but they're still both considered destroyers by their respective navies. There's a lot of historical similarities in the Honor Harrington universe. David understands how all that works. And so there's a lot of, he understands the history of how the ship types developed, et cetera. And so he's done actually a pretty good job of creating an artificial history for the background that isn't just taking real world navies and filing the serial numbers off. So in that regard, I think he did an excellent job. Let's see. So there's a couple of questions here I want to answer. I'm not going to go back super far, but let me throw a couple of them up. One is, I think that so Logix Finance asks, I'm trying to be better about reading the questions so that people who are listening, which includes me when I'm walking around the neighborhood, so that people that are listening know what the question is. Logix Finance says, I've asked you on this before, is it because of the need to have all the ships on screen at the same time? I think that that's a big chunk of it. In fact, I'm on record as saying that I kind of like the original Star Trek series. They weren't able to have the ships all on screen at the same time. They just didn't have the motion control technology and et cetera to move the models around. It was easier to look at one ship and then look at another. And I actually kind of like that model better because it gives a better indication of how far apart they were. And I think that model of combat makes more sense to me than the model of combat that we actually end up seeing in Next Generation. So, right, congratulations on getting safely home. Let's see. Okay, so Logix Finance also asks if I've watched Blake 7. So I actually haven't. I've never really seen an episode of Blake 7. And at the time, it was because it wasn't showing on any TV station that I had access to growing up. It's one of those things that I just have never really gone back and got caught up on. Probably should. It should probably be on the list of things to look at. So I can't really say that I have much opinion on that. So my S. Myers says, if you have an FTL drive and a reasonably performant telescope, you should never, ever be surprised. So, well, there's some interesting questions about all that. So that would make a good episode for for a future episode. So Olive says the drawback of the TOS combats was it was mostly a strategy I call park them and slug it out, except they weren't parked. They were doing high-speed passes at each other. It's amazing. They'd go zooming by each other at warp 5 and firing phasers and all the rest of it. So I think that was actually kind of different. Let's see. Okay. I'm going to answer one last question, and then I'll try to get everything else in the comments. Logic's Finest asked, what are my thoughts on Ron Moore's Battlestar Galactica style of space combat, using shells, missiles, and ships turning in place while since they are in space? There's things about that combat that I really like. In fact, that part I think is okay. The part that I have, I seriously wonder about is at a bigger picture level. The Cylons have an FTL drive that they can immediately turn around and use again. We see that happen. We see a ship pop in, take a look at the fleet, pop out right away. So they can do jumps back to back like that quite easily. They also have a resurrection ship, so that any of those fighters that are destroyed, the personality goes off to the resurrection ship and they can do another one, which means that they're effectively immortal as long as that resurrection ship is around. And so I don't understand why every Cylon Raider doesn't have a nuclear weapon and is basically a nuclear equipped kamikaze. It seems to me that that's the way, if I were really trying to take out the Galactica, that's how I would do it. There seems to be a lot of instances where they don't use their capability to the fullest. And I've often said that I want a situation, I'd love to see an episode about halfway through the first season after because remember all those initial episodes are back to back to back to back, right? It's the first half of that season is basically about a week. And so I'd like to see an episode where they get a chance to get a little bit of a breather. And Ty says to Adama, I'm bothered about something. Why aren't we dead? And Adama's response is, yep, I'm worried about that too. Something else is going on here and we don't understand it. The Cylons have a plan. They could have made it a good one. Okay. All right. And with that, I think it's probably time to call it. So let me turn that off. So, Lissa, I'm going to bring you back on.
Hello.
Oh, so hold on a second. Let me take that off. So I just decided to bring you back on because when I said I was going to bring her back on, or that I was done, she started doing this. So
yeah, it's been a long day. Had family over today, so
yeah, my day started. I woke up at I went to bed at 9 o'clock last night. I was up again at 11. Got back to sleep about maybe midnight or so. Woke up again about 3. Somewhere around 7, the power went out here, which meant that just about the time I was in fact, I think if I remember correctly, I had just put my CPAP machine back on and was going to try to sleep for another couple of hours. And I lost the CPAP machine when the power went off. So I'm going to go sleep now.
That's fair. That is entirely valid. I didn't actually fall asleep until close to 10 a.m. Opa woke up at 11 a.m. So I was maybe up for 30 minutes to an hour, getting him, coffee and out of bed and everything. And then fell back asleep for another couple hours. And then my brother got here and my parents got here. And now I am tired. I am very tired.
I understand. I'm tired too. I'm looking forward to going to sleep. So for what it's worth, I am living proof that you can turn a night person into a day person.
I am the opposite. I am a night person that has desperately tried to become a day person, and I still hate it.
So you know what the secret is? Have we talked about the secret to doing this? It is a device called a dawn simulator. It is basically, they come in 2 different flavors. One of them is a self-contained unit, and the other one you plug a lamp into. It basically rheostats the light level up in the room. And because basically when the light comes on, like when the sun comes up, it shines through your eyelids and it hits your optic nerve, which is really just part of your brain that sort of sticks forward, and your optic nerve starts flipping all the switches. All right, time to make the donuts, time to start the coffee brewing, etc., etc., and it starts bringing you up.
See, I'm that person that literally will just throw a pillow over my head and say "fuck you." So does not work with me.
There's a little discipline involved, but the thing is that when I have this turned on, usually my alarm never goes off. And the reason why it doesn't go off is that I'll just be in bed, and all of a sudden my eyes pop open, generally about 5 minutes before my alarm is supposed to go off, because it's been bringing the light level in the room up for the last 45 minutes, and I'm just awake. I mean, it's not like I'm awake, but I'd really rather be asleep. It's I'm awake. I'm ready to go hit the day. It is the single best purchase I have ever made.
See, also,
I've been saying that
since
for
I
almost
stream,
20 years
it makes more sense me being a night person anyway, too, though.
That's an entirely different story.
Oh, hi, Ezri. I have a cat above me who just made noises and stretched, and it was cute. But I don't have my cat cam set up yet because I have not been able to snap my travel camera back from my grandfather until the replacement for his camera gets in.
Travel camera from your grandfather?
So when I am like pet sitting or on vacation or whatever like that, yes, my laptop does have a webcam built in, but it's a kind of crappy one, so I've got an actual like external webcam that I have for it.
Okay.
And along with a really cheap blue Snowball mic, so I've got my travel set up. And when his webcam went out, obviously he's got like doctor's visits and stuff like that, and a lot of them are virtual now. So when his webcam decided to freak out on him, I let him borrow mine.
I'm impressed that your grandfather has a webcam.
Again, the only reason why is because of doctors.
Now I understand that.
Until they stopped supporting 3G, my grandfather still had a flip phone. So
my dad still has a flip phone.
So if it wasn't for that, he would still have the same flip phone. But when I went to replace his phone, because of that, they did not have flip phones anymore. So he now has a smartphone, and it's been an interesting process teaching him how to use one.
I still have a flip phone. It's in a box about 10 feet in that direction. I stumbled across it while looking for a cable earlier today. So
nice.
My Samsung flip phone over there. I haven't powered it on in like a decade.
Right. I am literally partnered with an energy drink company. And as wonderful as Juju is, it still does not change the fact that when I get up, I still just want to scream at the void, into the void.
Light therapy will help with that. Also, so as the designated old person in this conversation, let me give you a warning that caffeine stuff. Now, I say this as somebody, my favorite drug of all time is caffeine. The caffeine will only go so far.
Oh, I'm well aware.
Yeah.
I am well aware. That's why, like, vast majority of the time, unless, like, I really need caffeine, I try not to drink any in a day. Like, I mostly drink water. Like, do you know how many water bottles I found in my room when we were getting my room ready for my, like, new loft bed and everything? Yeah.
I can imagine.
Like, between the empty ones, so way too many empty ones, but then add in the fact that I am an ADHD chipmunk, apparently. So when I stream, what I will do is I will grab like 3 or 4 water bottles, and I will have them like over to the side, and like, I'll switch them out in my little mini fridge over here. So I've got like cold ones and warm ones that are room temp switched out.
Mm-hmm.
But with the way my room was set up at the time, sometimes they would like roll off the bed and like get stuck between the mattress and my little shelf that's behind me or something like that.
Yeah.
So when I cleaned my room to get this set up, I ended up finding it was like 13 and a half. And I say a half because some of them were drank, but there was also one of the like half-size water bottles. Which I haven't had in the house for months.
I used to, so this is just like a little box cutter type thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's a nice slim one. I used to carry one of these around with me wherever I went. It's just useful to be able to open boxes and stuff. And I'd lose them. And this isn't a cheap one. These are like $8, $9, $10 a piece.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like I couldn't figure out where they were going. And then I got ready to move. And underneath one of the couches that they had been sliding out of my pocket and then working their way down. And then there wasn't a bottom on the couch so that it would just end up on the floor.
Oh.
Because it would slide down through the back, specifically through where the base of the couch and the back mat, there was a slot there where it could slide through. When I moved that couch, I found like 24 of them. 15, 20 of them, something like that.
If you need to get rid of any that need a home.
I've still lost more over the years, and I've given a bunch of them away. So I'm down to I still have enough to just sort of have them all around. Yeah, caffeine is not good for the body, Logic's Finest says. Yeah, that
Look, there's a lot of things that aren't good for the body. Alcohol being one of them, technically. But you know what? We still technically drink poison to enjoy ourselves.
just be aware that there's stuff that you can do when you're in your 20s that you can't do later. Like
I am almost in less than 2 weeks. I am 30.
1 foot in the grave. Got it.
Yep.
A friend of mine just turned 50, and I was talking to him the other day, and he said, "Oh yeah, it's like there's all this stuff that I used to be able to just bounce back from in a couple of hours. It now takes a couple of days." And I said, "Have you reached the milestone of hurting yourself while you were asleep yet?"
Yes.
Yeah.
I have hypermobility. I have dislocated my jaw in my sleep.
Ooh.
Yeah. It was not fun. I ended up canceling my stream that day because I was like, my mouth hurts. I relocated my jaw. But it was not a fun process. I've dislocated my hip in my sleep. I've dislocated my jaw in my sleep. Yeah, I've got the hurting myself in my sleep covered at this point. And I started that in middle school.
Well, it's only going to get worse. Sorry to break it to you.
I know.
So you're not here next week.
I am here next week. I am not here the week after. So the 28th.
All right. So
the 28th, I am still on vacation.
I will officially wish you a happy birthday next week.
Sounds good. Yeah, my birthday's the 27th. So.
All right. So I think we're at the point where we should just go ahead and wrap it. So
yes.
Thank you very much, everybody. See you next week.
Have a good one. Bye.